All right. So I want to kind of talk really. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to kind of share something that I shared in a devotion probably about a week or two ago. But I just want to kind of encourage you to know that you have a purpose and a meaning in your life, and you know God has some things in mind long ago, before there were even human beings, and that's something that's hard for us to wrap our minds around, but it's true. Many people walk through life and not quite sure on what they should be doing, and is there really a reason for them to even exist any longer? And I just kind of want to encourage you today by looking at Ephesians 2, chapter 10, and I want to kind of talk about purposeful works. So Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, it's going to be really this one verse that we look at. It reads, For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. To kind of start with, there's so much in the first chapter and even in the beginning of this second chapter until you get here to verse 10 that discusses the position we were in before Christ did the great work that He did on our behalf. We were in a certain position, we were separated, or the scriptures use also alienated from God. But now, as we look back, we are in a certain position all because of what Christ did. And so that's just in a nutshell to kind of sum up really quickly where we are right now. Where we are in this position of entering in this relationship with God because of Christ. And just kind of our outlook on the world and even dealing with people is going to come out of all of that. And so one of the things I want to quickly highlight as well is this whole notion of us being created in the image of God. The image of God carries with it a burden in itself. But I think it's as Jesus stated in Matthew chapter 11, verse 30, where He says, For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And basically what He means there, it's manageable. It's kind of like picking up a backpack and being able to manage and walk around and function properly, even though I have this load on me. And I think the way that we look at being image bearers, at times we feel like we can't live up to that standard. And we'll kind of get into a little bit more of that as we talk. But when you talk about being created in the image of God, I think too many times people focus on the intelligent aspect or the mind factor in how we relate to God, but they fail to discuss sufficiently how God has acted in a certain way. Therefore, it is easy to miss how we are to act in a similar fashion, but we have a limited capacity in how we are going to be able to function in anything it is that we do. So, saying all of that, what do I mean by that? First thing is this. The dominion factor, we'll talk more about that, is vital to our understanding of why human beings were created. We were created to have dominion, just like God has dominion or rule just in general in the universe. We also have been given dominion. And so if you want to use kingdom language, it's our little kingdoms operating or functioning under God's great kingdom, under his umbrella. We do what we do based off of receiving constantly resources and wisdom and insight and all of these things from God, because we're under his umbrella, and it causes us to act a certain way, and it gives us the ability to act accordingly. The second thing is in God acting, right? Remember I said that a lot of people don't really talk much about that. Some people do. I'm not saying everybody don't. He created us a certain way, and the way that he created us, he thought that it was really good. And so to keep that in mind, that's gonna help us to understand how God sees us, right? When he created us originally, he saw that what he created was good. The purpose he had created it for, it was good. Everything fit and was going to work out the way that he wanted it to work. And we all know the story of the fall. Most people say the fall. I like to use the language of rebellion. I think it's more accurate. But we all know the reason why we don't function the way that we are supposed to function. Well, at least if you've been in Christian circles, you have some form of understanding of that. And lastly, how we operate in the world. We're talking about our deeds, and also how we view the other world. And not only that, but even how we see ourselves is going to be important. So kind of just keep that in mind as we begin to look at the text today. And so, depending on what English translation you use, the one that I just read was the New Living Translation, and it calls us his masterpiece. Some translations say his workmanship. But I want you to think about that which was made. But before we even really dig, I want to kind of look at how vocabulary.com illustrates these two words, workmanship and masterpiece. It describes workmanship in this way. The noun workmanship can describe the hard work or skill that goes into making something or working at a task. And it can also describe a quality of a handmade object that is skillfully crafted, right? And so, but look at how it describes masterpiece. An artist or writer is generally capable of creating only one masterpiece in his or her lifetime, if she makes a masterpiece at all. When an art historian or English teacher uses it, the word masterpiece implies a truly sublime, amazing creation. Now, both of these illustrations that are used for workmanship and masterpiece, they both imply that something was created by someone who possesses a great deal of skill and a great deal of intellect, and that which was created is something to behold in the eye of the one that created it. Before we move on, I want you to think about this, right? So it implies that whatever it was that was created, it was created by someone who possesses a great deal of skill and intellect. And I want you to really think about people that we observe in the world that we say that are really smart or really intelligent. We even put labels on people and we call them geniuses. We see people with certain skill set that we know that if the project is placed in their lap, that it's going to get done, and it's going to get done in the proper fashion. And when you think of something like that, we look at these things from an earthly perspective. Now think of God, right? The one who spoke the universe into existence, right? Everything that you see that's created around you throughout the universe, including the planet Earth, and even human beings, think of the intelligence and the skill set that go into something like that. And then it also implies that whatever was created is something to behold. Now just think about God who created us. Genesis tells us that he said that it was really good. And so I want you to think about how you're looking at yourself. But even before we even go any deeper than that, I want you to begin to start thinking that you belong to the skillful one. And I want you to begin to imagine how he sees what he has created. At times we intend to either see ourselves or how we see others is affected in some type of way based off of either what the person did to us or just basically we just don't feel good about ourselves. And this is one of the primary reasons why the mind must be renewed as Jesus' students. Having our mind renewed to a certain status will allow us to not only see ourselves in a certain way, but also look at others in the proper way. I want you to think about even the fetal development process in the womb. It reveals the hand of God. That 9-month process of this fetus growing and becoming a baby, fingers and toes and hands and eyes and nose. The brain is beginning to function. The heart, the lungs, all of these things are beginning to function, and this child is being created and shaped in a certain way using the DNA of both the mother and the father. That fetal development process itself, it reveals the hand of God. Scriptures even tell us that God says that I formed you in the womb. Now, think about his hand in that process. And I want you to really think about, like, artists out here that create things. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but just imagine beholding how you're forming something and it's coming out just the way that you want it. The question is, do we see ourselves as a masterpiece, or do we see ourselves as a piece of junk? And I want you to understand, if you don't hear anything else I say, you are God's masterpiece, and that means that he is satisfied with you. I'm talking about, because people will read into stuff that I'm saying or that I'm not saying. I'm not saying based off of lifestyles and anything like that. You being created in his image as a human being, he is satisfied with you. Whether you are living the way that he wants you to live or not, he's satisfied just simply because we are image bearers and he created us a certain way. Now, how we function and live the way that he wants us to or not, there are going to be consequences if we don't live the way that he wants us to live. And there are going to be blessing in living the way that he wants us to live, of course. But you'll see here in a little bit that there's a reason why he created us a certain way and why he created us in his image. The problem is that God sees us a certain way, but when we look at others, we don't see them as God sees them. Instead, we always want to focus on their flaws and their imperfections. That's how it is when we look at other people. But in the same way, that's how we look at ourselves sometimes. we don't think that we can live up to a lot of things because we know how messed up we are, especially in private when we're not around other people, because it's different when we go out in front of other people and we put that mask on. God's satisfaction with them should dictate how I interact with them. God's satisfied with them. And so I should treat them as image bearers as well. Yeah, this is something to think about. And I hope it encourages you. I mean, just when you reflect on how God sees you and how God sees his creation, it's important to really begin to reflect on how have I been looking at things. But even just to add to this, we need to understand that the Creator has insight on the created thing and what it was created for. Let me say that again. The Creator has insight on the created thing and what it was created for. There is not a thing that was created that does not have purpose or have a meaning for being here. Nothing. Everything has a purpose and everything has a meaning. Do not let anybody tell you that there's no reason for you being here. You're just showing up. Don't let people tell you that you're just dancing to your DNA and there's no real purpose or anything out here. If a person chooses to believe that, let them believe that. But you need to understand that God created you for a reason. You have meaning and you have purpose for your life. And an even more important thing to kind of turn over in our minds is this. Is it proper to seek the source, our source, in regards to our meaning or purpose? Or is it okay for us to just kind of make up things as we go along? And that's what a lot of people are doing. If you really sit and take some of the worldviews that are out here, whether it's religious or non-religious, when you really sit and think about some of the stuff that they are implying and that they are saying and what it means for human beings, and look at the outcome of and the fruit of people's lives who live by those principles, when you really sit and examine those things, when you put Jesus up to them, these things there's not even a close second that comes along. Stuff begins to really look ridiculous. But you have to decide on your own. But I'm telling you, you were created for a purpose. But the text even tells us that we were created to do good works. What do we mean by that which is good? Have you ever thought about what the word good really means or what it really implies? Because it's extremely easy for everyone to go around and just come up on their own with what they think the definition of good is, see the world through that lens, and then assumes that everybody else disagrees with what they're saying. But here in the text, but not just in this text, but throughout Scripture in general, the word for good here implies that just like us, it originates from God. So what do I mean by that? There are no personal feelings or preferences that dictate what the word good means. It means that the point of view regarding goodness comes from God. How God says something is good, that's what it means. It does not mean that we get to choose based off. I feel that when it comes to goodness, it means this. We don't dictate those things. It's kingdom language. It's where God's view is being upheld. I want you to really think about that, because that's something that's very important when we operate the way we operate in the world. We were created to do good works, good deeds. And when we're talking about good deeds, that which comes from God is going to benefit others for the good. The word here that's used in regard to deeds has to do with a work or a worker who accomplishes something. This is what some say on BibleHub.com. It's this work or this deed that carries out an inner desire. Look, simply put, is this. It is the carrying out of an intended purpose. The question that remains here is this. Where does this intended purpose come from in our lives? This inner thing, this thing in us that's saying I ought to be doing this. Where does that come from? We're going to kind of look at a little bit of that in here in just a moment. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But here's the thing. We're talking about just the way that we go about these good works or these deeds that this scripture is talking about. Part of this is in our daily living. The way we live, right? This way of living our lives is one that should be carried out in our everyday activities, even in the trivial things, even in the small things that we don't consider to be important. Strong's exhaustive concordance describes it this way. It describes it as walking at large. It's expressing the ability or the proof that you can actually do the thing. It's displaying in our day-to-day lives the evidence that God has done this new thing. It's not just a new thing, it's a correct thing, and it's how He wants us all to live. That's what it looks like. Displaying it every day in our lives. The evidence that God has come in and shown us exactly how to live, and us carrying it out. It's important that we understand this. It's important that we understand how God sees us and how He sees His creation just in general. But it's also important to understand the purpose, one of the purposes for our lives, and how we ought to be carrying out this good into the world to the rest of humanity. But I asked a question earlier, where does this intended purpose come from? But the scripture here tells us that God ordained these things beforehand. The word here, it implies that it was made ready in advance. It was already prepared for whoever the person or whatever the thing is. It was already prepared before the thing was already created. You can kind of look at it this way, the answer before the problem. Before there was a sin problem in the world, before human beings rebelled from God, God already had the antidote, which is Jesus, already in place, that He would arrive on earth at the proper time. Before there was even a problem, He was the answer. You can also look at it this way. Before conditions for human life that even existed on planet Earth or even in the universe, God had human beings in mind. This is part of God's plan, and this is part of God's project for human life. Beforehand, before bad existed for good to be the proper example in front of human beings, God had these things in mind. But again, the problem is we have this not feeling ready attitude, right? We don't feel ready to accomplish the task or the task that God lays before us. And I totally get it, because before entering into this awesome relationship with God through Christ Jesus, we were not able to live this out. We were not able to carry this out in our own lives. But now, because of what the Father has done through Jesus, we can have confidence that we can navigate the waters of life, and we can do it in a purposeful way, the way God intended for us to do it. I get it. Sometimes it's overwhelming to live up to being an image bearer, to fully walking out the dominion, right? The temptation is always there for us to come from up under God's umbrella and to begin to just run our little kingdoms the way that we want to. The temptation and the testing is always there in our lives. But I'm telling you that if we remained under his umbrella, and if we continue to seek his face in how we ought to be living, how we ought to treat other people, and all of these different things, and we get consistent with living that out. Dr. Daniel Napier calls this walk with God, one of the ways he describes it is being on a path of continual correction. And just think about that. Living our lives on a journey where we're constantly being corrected, right? It's like a broken bone being set into place. We're constantly going through life and things being set right that were messed up in the past. And God is going to help us with that. That's why the gracious God is so important. We don't have to do it alone. So to conclude, I want you to really think about this. You need to know that you were created with the same wisdom that created the universe and created everything that you see, and that you have a meaning and a purpose for your life. Again, the same wisdom that brought forth the universe, the stars, the planets, everything that you see, and human beings that you see, how different we are. Some of us got similar things to us, but we're different. You have a meaning and a purpose for your life. And the second thing, how we live and how we conduct our lives is born out of that purpose. As always, I want to leave a blessing with you. Grace, mercy, and peace be with you.